anti-terrorism laws? Are they a good idea? Do we need them? Or are they just a waste of time? Or something more ominous? Before I introduce my guest to you today, we went out to see what you think of this topic. We asked the question, do we need anti-terrorism laws in this country? Let's have a look at what you had to say.
Within this country, yes, I believe we do. I also believe Tony Blair doesn't take enough effort with our people abroad. I'm ex-army, so I do believe that our soldiers abroad aren't being treated properly and aren't being, well, doing the jobs they're trained for.
Yes.
Why?
Why? Well, it appears that we do. The government is trying to convince us that we do. Maybe there's a question there.
No, I don't think so, no. I think there's quite enough laws to protect us against terrorism as there is. I mean, there was never any of this hoo-ha when the IRA was bombing this very city. I mean, so why should they want terrorism laws now when they're only bringing them? I think it's just another nail in the coffin of civil liberties.
Yes, we certainly do.
Why?
Why? Because the world is getting more and more, it seems to be terrorists all over the place, things going on, so we just need more and more laws to sort of control terrorism.
Interesting. Well, it's time to meet our expert guest today. We have to be honest with you viewers at home. We've asked the opposing side to this argument to attend today. Now, we've spoken to many Labour MPs and asked them to become involved and share their opinion with us. However, we couldn't find one single MP that was willing to come on this show and talk to us about why these new measures should be put into place and why Britain needs these new laws. I find that astounding. But although without the Labour Party here to explain the positive aspects of these new laws, we are still going to discuss the topic. We're joined here today by Bushra Irfan from the White Castle Trust and Malcolm Fowler of the criminal law, who's a criminal law solicitor, from Jonas Roy Bloom. Hello and welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Pleased
Now,
to
be here.
Yes, I'm glad you've come in to talk about this very controversial topic. We must be careful that we don't contravene the Terrorism Act 2006.
Getting increasingly difficult not to do so.
Absolutely. Now, I'll start with you first, Malcolm. Tell me, what do you feel about the footage that we just viewed?
Well, it's fascinating because one speaker there harked back to the Birmingham bombings, and I remember that vividly. And there were temporary measures brought in there. They had to be renewed every year. Eventually, there was no stomach for renewing every year, and it became permanent. It becomes a bad habit, and then you build on the bad habit.
And Bushra?
Well, all I can recall from the Birmingham bombings was that some innocent people were condemned and sent to prison and came out after many, many years being found innocent. So how far the law goes and draconian measures such as these go and putting pressure on the police to come up with somebody to use as a scapegoat is something that we really have to look into and consider as well.
Now, the Home Office has released documents which essentially, even in the introduction of what the Terrorism Act is all about, defends their position. I'll read to you what the Home Office website had to say. This particular act received royal assent on the 30th of March 2006. It was not, I repeat, not a direct response to the July attacks on London, as new terrorism legislation had already been planned. After the attacks, however, they consulted with law enforcement and intelligence agencies to make sure that their views were considered in developing the legislation. Malcolm, what do you have to say about that?
Phooey. The reality is that the security forces and any government of any complexion will see its window of opportunity and will say these are extraordinary times and you need to give us extraordinary powers. They are not extraordinary times. They do not need extraordinary powers. The criminal law is quite robust enough to deal with cases like this. And the reality is that once in place, these laws are abused and extended. It's what the military call mission creep. You will now find that they will say, well, this is so useful, and after all, we're at war on crime, aren't we? And so the powers become extended into what we might call the domestic sphere. And that is what we have to guard against. It's a death by 1,000 cuts, with all our civil liberties being taken away a bit at a time, so that they hope we don't notice.
Now, what is very interesting is what we saw on the footage. Why, in fact, were these measures not introduced when we were having such great conflict in Ireland? Bushra, do you have any opinions?
Well, this is what I'd like to say as well. And the fact is that terrorism is nothing new in this country. It's been going on for years, and disruption and everything over Protestants and Catholics. Ireland people, the Irish people bombed Manchester, the whole of the city centre. I don't recall any special laws being brought in against them, and I don't recall them being called Catholic or Protestant terrorists, a single religion being victimized or singled out and condemned, which seems to be happening now. Instead of just being terrorists as being extremists in a certain religion, they're now targeting the entire religion itself, and I think that is a dreadful thing to do, and it's a very volatile thing to do, and there can be some very serious repercussions from that.
Now, the particular Home Office document that we're also referring to says that the Terrorist Act specifically aims to make it difficult for extremists to abuse the freedoms that we cherish. Now, Malcolm, I'll go over to you. As a solicitor, can you define for our viewers the kinds of freedoms that they wish to protect, but are in fact, in your opinion, freedoms that will actually become under threat?
Well, there's this idea around that there's the collective norm of people who are law-abiding and therefore deserve protection, and that they can be polarized and divided from those who are a danger and are terrorists and criminals. This is manifest nonsense, and you only have to think about it for a minute or two to realize that it is. But it's rather soothing nonsense where the public are in danger of buying into it. And the reality is, you know, you then look for models abroad. These ideas about the 90 days detention, for example, are not new. If you look to South Africa, the period of detention, guess what, as I recall, was 90 days during the apartheid time. And yet they wrench the facts, they distort the facts in order to fit the model that they've already taken off the shelf from other regimes. We now have a situation where President Putin in Russia is able to say, don't talk to me about civil liberties, talk to me about cash for honours, talk to me about Belmarsh, talk to me about things. That is why this is so corrosive, not merely at home, but also abroad.
Now, I would like to basically represent, possibly, because we do not have a representative from the government which enforced these particular acts, I would like to present, though, some of their opinions. I'll start with you, Bushra. This is an unprecedented time in our history in Britain, and this represents the terrorism that we're now seeing, an unprecedented threat.
I don't agree at all. As we've already discussed, terrorism has been going on for years and years, in fact hundreds of years in this country and in every probably country. There's been attacks before, there's been attacks in London by the Irish people, there's been attacks on Manchester city centre when the whole city centre was blown up. I mean, if you look at those, I mean, I don't see these attacks as being unprecedented. Yes, you could argue that for the first time there has been certain measures taken by governments which are extreme and which could be used as an excuse for terrorists to use to do the terrorism, but I don't see terrorism itself as being unprecedented.
Well, Malcolm, how would you respond to the unprecedented threat sort of rolled out campaign?
Well, just because they keep saying it doesn't make it true.
Yeah.
That's how Goebbels succeeded. He just kept saying things through his propaganda machine until people just rolled over and said, okay, it must be so.
I believe that there's actually a quote by Goebbels as well, which states, if you lie often enough, they will believe you.
Yeah. Especially if you're looking someone steadily in the eyes and assuring them that they won't abuse the powers.
Now, that brings me to my next particular comment from the Labour government. Trust us. Trust us to ensure that these particular laws will actually protect the British public. Malcolm?
No government is ever entitled